Hi, thank you for logging on to our website www.tutorialspoint.com, and we also thank you for watching all our soft skills video tutorials. Well, the present topic, that is cracking interviews, is in total relation with my earlier video, which is job search skills. I strongly recommend you to watch that video tutorial, share your comments in the same video tutorial, or maybe you can get the discussion in the present video tutorial as well. So do go back, watch the video, and then probably you can follow it up with this video tutorial. So the word cracking an interview, what is it all about? So to make you all understand, let's move on to understand the introductory part of cracking interview as such, the process. Interviewer and interviewee and interview are three different terms which cannot be interchanged. To talk about the first word, interviewer, the person who's facilitating, the person who's conducting the interview, the person who's the facilitator of the discussion. Interviewee is the person who's actually giving responses to the question. It could be you, me, it could be anybody who's in the process. And interview is basically a discussion between interviewer and interviewee. So to talk about this video tutorial is just not to give you about the heads up of what the interview process is, but what are the different interview process and how do I approach certain tasks, how do I form that first impressions, because first impressions are the lasting impressions to talk on, and to form that unique aspect of clearing the discussion and getting that the right job offer at the right time. Moving on to understand the course overview, starting off with the introduction front, we will move on to understand what employers expect from us, that is when you and me are taking the process of the interview. Structured interview, unstructured interview. Well, to talk about just little front on the unstructured part, these are the discussions which has open-ended questions, and they do not lead into a specific conversation, but they certainly lead into a conversation that can be either professional or it can be accepted by the interviewer or the prospective employer as such. Moving on, one-on-one interviews, which are also called one-to-one interview, that is a discussion between the interviewee and the interviewer, just the one-on-one discussion. This is basically to check on your problem solving skills, your teamwork skills, or maybe your conversational skills too. Group interviews and panel interviews, again different set of interview channel and a platform. The most important thing to keep in mind is there are two different terms, and we have to obey certain rules and adhere to the aspect of why certain interviews are group interviewed and why certain interviews have the panel discussion. Moving on, stress interviews, most important aspect in today's era and today's world. For almost all critical job roles, we have this as one of the interview rounds, though the word stress interview is not labeled or not being discussed openly in public, but certainly there are certain job roles that demands your choice of words, your responses when you're placed in a certain hypothetical situation. Moving on, informational interviews, that is to get more information. Maybe as a person that I am almost in the process of getting selected or getting shortlisted for this particular organization, and I think on certain aspects, that is how a certain job role works and how do I take the approach and stand for after accepting the job offer. Moving on, competency-based interviews, well, these are the most important and very critical as well in order to crack and deal with it. In today's video tutorial, this is the crux of our discussion, and I'm going to extensively talk about how to crack and what is the approach that you're supposed to follow on. Moving on, the next slide still has the course overview, which is assessment center interviews, which is you have a periodic walk-in interviews and you have certain assessment centers that you're supposed to go and take up the discussion or probably write certain examination which are computer-based test, or it could be pen and paper test as well. Telephonic interviews, one of my favorite interviews, because I feel the urge of being all good by myself, because I don't necessarily have to face the person. Well, not that the other interviews are not good, but this is certainly where you can crack a deal with all possibilities, because you just have to adhere certain basic telephone etiquette and mannerism, and that's about it. And most important, listening, of course. Moving on, types of interviews and stages with a concrete conclusion that I'm going to talk after this towards the end of the interview. First slide after the course overview, what employers want. I would really like to hear from you if you are already in a competitive work role, or a job role or in an organization, please drop in a comment as to advising not just for us, for the others as well, as to what is most important to keep in mind when I actually apply for a job role or when I clear the interview and I have the job offer with me. To talk about it, certain basic elements: interpersonal skills, intrapersonal skills, time management skills, punctuality, discipline, all these are basic social mannerism. Even at our home, we have been always advised to be honest, to showcase our integrity, to sort of follow certain rule book what your family has given you as values and principles of life. So employers certainly are in a nutshell looking out for something very similar, but when I have to put it in an overall nutshell, employees are certainly looking out for somebody who's of course hardworking, with the zeal and enthusiasm to learn more and accept the feedback and move on to incorporate the feedback and be at its best. So no employer would like to have a person in his or her organization who's not open for feedback, who's not open for discussion, who has a very different approach towards life, that is not accepting each other and not having the basic value system is in his or own life. Moving on, structured interview. Well, this is one of the interview form where your interview discussion is quite structured and you are being asked close-ended questions. So understand, interview is not about a correct answer or a wrong answer, but how you take the approach. That is most important, and that is what employers look out for. So when you look at organizations such as Facebook, Microsoft, Google, or anything that which is like the most happening organization, for that matter Amazon, well, they have only one clarity about selecting the right candidate with regard to the approach that they take towards answering that specific question. So structured interview, quite clear in terms of what they're expecting, that is close-ended answers. So basically it is a yes or a no, or probably just which can be a starter for the conversation. Moving on to understand unstructured interview, basic again. The fundamental ideology is close-ended questions, that is, which do not allow you to, which allows you to open up in terms of discussion. Again, there's no correct or wrong answer towards it, but all you have to do is, follow the adherence of what is being asked. Well, these are basically, a conversation, and these are conversational interviews. We are not really focused on the aspect whether they are structured or unstructured, but basically we all have been through this stage of having certain structured conversation or unstructured conversation to understand. One-on-one interview, personally this is one of the good deal, because you'll have all the opportunity to showcase yourself, all that zeal and enthusiasm that you can communicate through your word choice. You can show your passion towards the job role, towards the organization. One tip of advice is do visit the website in order to understand the vision, the mission statement of the organization, the recent developments that happen, the recent accomplishment the organizations have the organization has taken up, and most important thing, what is the CSR activity the organization is linked with, that is corporate social responsibility. Every organization has their own set of understanding towards either helping an orphanage or helping a school or helping a home for the aged, kind of activities that they are involved. So try and link it with your own conversation, with your own vision and mission statement, stating that you are a best fit for this particular job role or to work in an organization of this kind, because you have a similar zeal of maybe helping a school kid get the education. Maybe you would like to be part of the similar activity or be part of the process too. Moving on, panel interviews. Well, these are basically a panel of judges, a panel of team leaders or the operational managers or the leadership team who are part of it, and this is again more or less a criteria to either shortlist, select, and understand. The picture depicts it all, because 4 or 5 people have different approach towards the discussion, and this has again its own pros and cons, because not everybody would carry the same biasness towards the person, or not everybody is unbiased towards the person. So it's all about taking the approach and answering the questions which are being asked. Important tip to keep in mind here: in the panel interview, you have to give eye contact from the person whom you started conversing with, the person who's towards the end of the table, or maybe you start the eye contact from the person who's the end of the table and move on to the person who's asked you the question. So people generally miss this out, thinking that I should only be showcase my motivational or confidence skills to the person who's discussing or who's in conversation with me, well, that's the biggest mistake that we end up doing. So you are supposed to make yourself comfortable with this 4 or 5 set of people who are about, or seek the acknowledgement, ask more clarity towards ensuring that you get the question correctly. So basically you are involved in the conversation with all 4, though only one person is conversing with you, or maybe one person have asked you the question, to keep in mind. Moving on, group interviews. Well, these are the set of interviews which are not just conducted at the employer's place, but a lot of business schools, a lot of B schools, MBA intakes has to go through this set of interview platform, which is you are being asked in group, or probably 2 or 3 people enter the discussion and you both are asked a question. And how would you simulate that example? How would you work towards answering and taking the approach towards a question? To keep in mind here, 2 most important things: your problem solving skills, your communication of course, and as well as your team spirit, your team working skills are accounted for. Though you are being clubbed with an absolute stranger, forget all your ego, forget all sort of labeling that you carry in the mind. Maybe I might not be comfortable with a woman along for a group interview, or maybe as a woman I might not be comfortable with a guy along for the interview. You just have to think it's a behavior which is being tested, and the behavior has to be exhibited at its best. That's on. Next slides, test interviews. More or less, people who have worked in call centers and who have worked through the process of certain calling experiences and all can totally relate to this interview pattern. That is, you're being asked to wait for about 4 hours, 5 hours, or maybe you're being asked a very hypothetical situation, maybe quite a controversial situation. Initially to go by, you might actually digest the question and then take the approach towards answering it. Well, you just have to keep in mind that there's an intention behind it. When you're being placed in a certain hypothetical situation, how would you react and how would your approach be is what they test you on. So keep in mind, next time when you're being asked a very controversial question, or you've been urged, or you've been like made to get the frustration level at its highest, at its peak, understand it's your stress interview that you're giving, and come out really good with flying colors, because it's just the behavior which has been accounted for. Nothing called a right answer, nothing called a wrong answer to think. Informational interviews, well, these are the interviews which are set between the interviewee, somebody who is taking up the process, or maybe somebody who is accepting the job or offer. Not every time you might get this opportunity, and this is again country specific as well. At least in India, you have very limited opportunities, because the availability of the interviewer is subjected to totally his schedule and commitment towards whatever the other tasks that they have. So it's basically a person who's accepting the job offer would like to meet up the human resource team, or maybe like to meet up somebody who's actually taking up the owning the process, or who's the owner of the business or the industry, to seek and get more information. So might you might get a fair opportunity to crack it, or you might not get a fair opportunity to crack that schedule as such, but do try to attempt to seek out for something informational interview as such. Moving on, competency-based interviews. Like I said, I would like to really spend some time on this slide. Competency-based interviews are the most important and critical chunk in the entire interview process. This is basically for somebody who's on a little hierarchical ladder, and they technically test you on not just on your subject, but your supervisory skills, your team leader skill, in case you follow, or in case you have been having it in the early experience, and your leadership skills. So basically they asked you questions based on the competency that you carry on your resume or your CV, and then you're being questioned. It's again an open-ended conversation. There is of course a correct and wrong answer that they're looking out for in terms of approach. If I have to quote an example, if you are a leader, if you have been in the process of supervising a set of people, maybe like 10 people or 12 people, if a question is being asked for you in an interview stating that, what if 6 people call you up on the same day stating all sort of emergency that they cannot make it to work? How would you cope up this particular challenge, and how would you still meet your SLA, and how would you not and how would you ensure that this is not a repeat instance? So basically they are looking out for certain specific words, certain specific terminology, and for this you have to do really extensive research to be there and impress the interviewer. So next time when you're preparing for interview, just do browse through competency based interview questions for your particular job role that you're looking out for, and do visit our website, do read through on our content tutorial to understand this in a much deeper level. Moving on, assessment center interviews. Well, these are again randomly which happens in the in the setups like India or maybe the other countries. All you have to keep in mind is in the specific days allocated for the interview, maybe once or twice you have to visit this center for a couple of interview discussion, maybe a couple of written examination to this particular assessment centers, and it's all totally based on your job role and job requirement. Moving on, telephonic interviews, like I said, it is one of my favorite interview pattern. I do conduct telephonic interviews and I underwent many conversations which I personally like. Most important thing to keep in mind, well, I'd like to give a lot of tips and advice here. Please ensure that you are available at the time which has been allocated to you. If not so, do let them know well in advance. In case you're accidentally at a place or at a situation where you're not able to take up the call or take up the conversation as such, do ensure that you educate the person that you're not available to do so. And what is most important out here is keeping in mind that the time which is being allocated, which is the most professional way of taking up to the interview discussion. In case you're not available, ensure that you educate the person, and to keep in mind further, there should be absolute zero background noises. And other thing to keep in mind, the word telephonic interview and the picture depicts it very clearly that you're not available in front of the interviewer, the examiner as such. So all you have to do is your body language has to be projected really well. So when I say body language accounts for your maximum communication, that is effective communication, you have to ensure that you follow all sort of your voice modulation technique, your intonation technique to keep in mind, and project yourself well, project your voice well to showcase that you're confident, and your references and your responses have to be given out in a manner which is accepted, and your voice clarity, your voice audibility. So the word picture can be depicted really well here. So when I say picture, I mean pitch, intonation, courtesy, your tone, understanding that is a very simple language, your rate of speech, your enunciation, and your technique to project your voice too. So ensure that you are available for the conversation, ensure that you do not overdo certain sentences or repeat certain phrases. If not available, simple technique to follow. Would you mind repeating the phrase, or would you mind to update me, or probably simplify the expression rather than using the expression sorry for everything. Now that is the most irritating point. Not just for telephonic interviews, but for also face-to-face discussion, where we repeatedly use the word sorry, would you mind to say this, or sorry I didn't get you. So you have to be a little mindful and sensitive about this aspect. So these are the basic tips that you're supposed to follow. I'm sure more or less you've been following it as well, but most important thing, especially when you do not present yourself in front of the person, your body language plays a very important role. So don't slouch on the chair while you talk and connect with the person, because that actually reflects that you are lazy, because that showcases on in your voice tone. Smile, because smile reflects in your voice. This is something absolute statement, and it's comical for a lot of us that how can smile reflect, but smile actually reflects in the conversation. Moving on, types of interviews: behavioral questions, traditional questions, case questions, role play questions, industry specific questions, and brain teasers. Well, these are basic way of getting started with the discussion, or maybe leading towards a discussion. Behavioral questions: a behavior is being given to you, and they'll ask you to either take the approach towards the behavior, or what would your approach be if certain behavior is given to you. Moving on, traditional questions: tell me about your family, tell me about yourself, and things like that. Case questions: a case study is being presented to you, and how would you take the task ahead is what they look out for. Role play questions: again, there's a role which is being given to you, and they ask you to play that role and depict and exhibit the qualities what is expected out here. Industry specific: if you're applying for a role in a internet-based industry, or if you're applying in an e-commerce based industry, then that specific questions are being asked, or be it a call center industry or be it a IT firm as such. Question, it could be generic question, could be on your personal details, could be on your personal information, your personal data to talk on. Brain teasers, well, these are, again, there's no correct answer or a wrong answer for it. The only thing that you have to keep in mind is, how would you take the approach towards the question and answer it well. Moving on, stages of interviews. Pre-interview, like I recommended, do watch our earlier video which is on job search skills. Moving on to understand, what is important in the pre-interview stage is nothing but your cover letter, your resume or your CV or your portfolio if you are from a specific industry like your architect industry or from an aviation industry or maybe from a fashion industry, where you have to project and present the portfolio as such. Interview, the process, the discussion between the interviewer and the interview. It could be any discussion, it could be group interview, it could be a panel interview, it could be a competency based interview, it could be any interview for a discussion to move on. Body language, most important and effective way to project yourself that yes, you are a person who's a right fit, be it a face-to-face discussion or be it a telephonic discussion, that you have to keep in mind. Avoidable questions, well, there is a reason that they ask you these kind of questions. Could be like on a marital status, so do not try and avoid it. Try and see if you can give them an answer, or probably educate them that you aren't comfortable talking about it, or maybe you can certainly talk off the discussion of the platform. Post-interview process, informational interview can be taken into account as one, or maybe you can just directly get in touch with the person to seek out for more information about the job role or the organization. Conclusion, well, 3 points that I like to discuss out here is do follow the the pattern that we have just suggested as to what different interviews that you're supposed to follow on. Go by the tools and techniques that we have advised in the earlier video tutorial, and to keep in mind the positive attitude can turn out anything that you desire and you want to walk through in your life. So it's all about having that exercise interest and enthusiasm, and you can certainly crack a deal out here. Thank you for watching. Do comment in the comment box below. We would like to take the discussion ahead, and we would like to certainly hear from you if this video was helpful, and any suggestion to improve on this video, we would just open for the feedback. Thank you.